Hello, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here with you today. For us to look at how the world would look like in 2027, it is important for us to understand how the world looks like today. I would like to analyze with you a topic that has always been very important for all of us, that is global food security. But I want to look at this issue according to the different events that the world have suffered in the last couple of years. And I would like to put in evidence some of the impacts that two important shocks that the world has suffered, as it is the COVID-19 pandemic and also now the war in Ukraine, and the impacts that it has had in different aspects of global food security. So the name of my presentation for today is Global Market Shocks and Food Security and Food and Nutrition Security. And I would like to look at the key implications for a specific group of countries that are exposed to international markets at a great extent. In the last decades, the world has made very good improvement to end hunger, food insecurity, and malnutrition by 2030. Yet, in the last couple of years, we have reversed that trend. We are actually moving in the wrong direction. At the current pace, 670 million people would still be undernourished in 2030. This is about 8% of the world population, the same as in 2015, when the world embraced the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. Major shocks have heightened the task of ending hunger. Nearly 811 million people face hunger in 2020. About 106 million more people than when the COVID pandemic started. Globally, 2.4 billion people lacked access to adequate food in 2020. And about 3 billion people do not have access to an appropriate diet. But how have we arrived to such a situation? How we have been able for several years to be in a very positive trend, and all of a sudden we fall in a situation where the trend have reversed and the world is becoming more distant for achieving its goals. There are 4 drivers that I would like to discuss with you today that affect food security and nutrition in the world. The first one is related to economic slowdowns and downturns. The pandemic have brought a major strain for global economies, for the economies of each one of our countries. And also the war in Ukraine have contributed to accentuate different prices for commodities, for energy, and for fertilizers. That is a very important factor of production in agriculture. There is other 3 very important factors too. Conflicts within borders. A number of countries in the last few years have faced major conflicts within borders. People fighting with their neighbors just because of political reasons and because of conflicts related to natural resources. In Africa and Latin America, we have several countries that have been in major conflict. And the levels of food insecurity and nutrition insecurity have gone up substantially in those countries. There is also a very important factor related to the cost of the diets that we need to consume. Healthy diets are becoming much more expensive, and the most vulnerable households are not able to afford the cost of such diets. And there is an important trend that our countries have been facing in the last decades, that is climate variability and the increasing incidence of extreme weather events. Climate change is real, and it is putting major strain in the capacity of our countries to produce the food that we need. Let me share with you some facts. The war in Ukraine has brought a severe blow to the global economy. just in the shadow of the recovery after the pandemic. This has aggravated global supply chains. The problems that we face with the pandemic have accentuated. It have impacted the flows of trade and also the costs, or the logistical costs of bringing food to countries that need to import, and also have brought inflationary pressures on the prices of energy, fertilizers, and the prices of commodities, of food commodities. If you look at the graphs, you will see that since the beginning of 2020, when the pandemic started, the prices of important fertilizers like urea and DAP, which are major inputs in agriculture production, they started to increase slowly but steady. And with the arrival of the war in Ukraine, the price have spiked. And those prices, although they have alleviated in the last few weeks, few months, those prices continue at record high. We need to understand what that actually means for each one of our countries and for the capacity of each household to actually secure their food and nutrition. Russia and Ukraine combined account for a major share of the production of food globally. But not only they are very important producers, they are even more important exporters of food commodities. And as you can see, it is almost 60% of the exports of vegetable oil in the world comes from one of those two countries. It is the same for about 20% of the barley and about 17% of the wheat. All commodities that we consume in the very country that we are, and that a good share are imported from many countries in the world including Russia and Ukraine. 50 countries source more than 30% of their cereals from Russia and Ukraine. About 26% countries source about half of the cereals that they consume, also from Ukraine. And for some countries, as it is the case of Egypt, a place that I lived, more than 85% of wheat that is a major staple in the country is also imported from Russia and Ukraine. Let me talk to you about a group where Egypt is, that is called the Southern and Eastern Mediterranean countries. This is a group of 5 countries: Jordan, Lebanon, Tunisia, Egypt, and Morocco. And I put Turkey as just a point of reference there. These are countries that are greatly dependent in imports, a major share of the calories they consume. If you look at the case of Jordan, more than 80% of the calories that the population consume are imported. And in the case of Egypt, that is the largest importer of wheat in the world, 37% of their calories are actually crossing the border from other countries. But not only that, these countries are extremely dependent in these markets in Russia and Ukraine to actually source most of the products that they consume. And you will see what is important here is that not only they have to import a very large quantity of the calories that they consume, most of those calories actually coming from a very small number of countries, namely Russia and Ukraine. In the case of Egypt, you would see there that is about 40%. Those Semitic countries, as I said, they are very important food importing countries that depend on Russia and Ukraine. And when you look at the levels of the composition of their diets, they are actually very dependent in cereals. And you will see on the right side of the graph, you will see the share of cereals, oils, and oilseeds in the total calories that they consume. And you will see that in cases like Egypt, it represents about 70%. And the implication that it actually have for those countries is that they are importing the majority of the calories that they consume from countries where the conflict have arrived and where commodity prices have increased to all-time high. I would like to show you some of the solutions those countries can actually engage to make their lives much better. Just consider some of the policy areas, some of the solutions that can bring, can alleviate the problems for countries like Egypt. I will show the case as, for example, diversifying the sources where they are importing foods. They do not need to depend only in a couple of countries, but their volumes are very high and they really need to a lot of time to diversify those sources. It's not in an overnight. And that's why now they cannot diversify so fast. Also, phasing out some blanket subsidies that are actually delivering subsidized bread for 70% of the population. But the share of the population that actually need those subsidies is much smaller. So they can have much more targeted subsidies that can help them. And also reducing the production-consumption gap, basically the share of imports that, compared to the share that is produced locally. So it is very important that, we consider two things to actually reduce this gap. The first one is related to increasing local production, and I say vertically, meaning using the same water and the same land which are very scarce in the country, that we have the capacity actually to produce much, much more. And at the same time, in the demand side, in the consumer end, we should actually reduce the level of consumption. Egypt consumes more than about the double of the average bread consumption per day. So every day, an Egyptian is consuming about the double of the average person is consuming in any other part of the world. So it's a very high level of consumption. If they could reduce the consumption of those cereals, it could really contribute to their food system. And I will just finish with the last part that is related to this issue of actually increasing vertically, using the same resources, the quantity of food that we are actually producing. But efforts in that direction needs to be climate smart. The country, as I mentioned before, is facing major problem with increasing temperatures, reductions in the level of rainfall, which is very substantial for a country that doesn't have much rain, and also the incidence of several pests and the desalinization of a lot of soil because of the seawater level rise. So the country is losing a lot of land that were once productive to salinization, and they are reducing steadily the level of productivity. Let me show with you, and with that I finish, two types of solutions, specific solutions that we are considering. I'm studying this with a group of people myself, and the first one is the use of mechanized raised beds. So when you produce wheat, you basically make some little beds for the wheat to be planted in those areas. And those beds actually allow us to make a better use of the fertility of those soils and a better use of the soil moisture. By applying this can help us, that is some of the preliminary estimations, it has not been published, but can help us to reduce water efficiency or to increase of water efficiency from producing 1 kilo of wheat from 1 metric cube of water, you can increase that to produce about 1.6. That is a very drastic increase. That can help us to offset greenhouse gas emissions. you can reduce about almost 1 ton for each acre that you produce. That is an incremental. So it is 1 ton less than the business as usual method that they are using. And that could create 28,000 more jobs and could reduce the production consumption gaps by about 1.5%. That is very substantial. That is one technology or one practice that would be applied just in 25% of the land. That is our estimation, is just 25% adopted this, that is the type of impact. And also you could consider drip irrigation and conservation tillage. So a production system that do not, use plows in excess. So it is you manage the soil in a very conservative way, and you improve the types of technology that you're using from flood irrigation that is used from the rich Nile, that is used in a very inefficient way. Now you're using pressurized irrigation systems. And that could help us to go from about 1 kilo per metric cubic to more than 2 kilos. It means about 1.4 tons of CO2 that we would be emitting in the atmosphere, less than the business as usual. And that would mean about 25,000 more jobs that I would be creating, and about 4% reduction in the production consumption. So you see that there are a myriad of solutions. It's easy for me to describe this here, but it's not easy to achieve all of this. There is implication for policies from the government that needs to support that. There are investment both from public and private sources that needs to be mobilized. And most important, there are behaviors that needs to be changed. There are farmers that want to change from the status quo to a system that is much more efficient and that will put their countries in a better position, withstand the shocks of international markets. Thank you very much.